I'm Jessie Jestar, and welcome to this month's episode of Cosplay Connect. So this month's theme was video games, and I was thinking, well, since Halloween's on its way, why not do something from a horror game? And that's why I chose one of my favorite killers from the game Dead by Daylight. In this month's episode, I'll be teaching you guys how to make this mask and the weapon of Susie. And I hope as you guys watch this video, not only do you guys learn how to make these two really cool props, but also learn something new about working with EVA foam. And now, let's jump right into it, starting with the mask.
The first step of making this mask is of course to acquire a pattern. The pattern I used here will be available for download for free on my Ko-fi website, which will be linked down below. Once you have your pattern, you cut it out and you trace it onto some foam. I used a high density 5mm foam for this. I transferred the pattern onto the foam with a white marker, and I made sure to include all of the dots. And also made sure to mark each of the seams with A, B or C as according to the pattern. Then using an X-Acto knife or a craft knife, cut out the pattern. Make sure that your knife is perpendicular to the surface that you're working with to get a clean cut, and making sure that your pattern will fit together nicely without any issues. I also used the bottom of my empty mug to sharpen my craft knife. This is to make sure that the craft knife is nice and sharp with every cut and is not pulling against the foam, making a rough surface. Now that everything is cut out, I used contact adhesives to stick everything together. First starting with the darts of each individual piece, I glued those together first, then I glued the bigger pieces together. The reason why I put my contact adhesive in this little squeezy bottle is because it makes application a lot easier, as you can use the nozzle to just spread the glue over the seam. This also stops your big tin of contact adhesive from drying out as you're working with it. It is very important to be patient while working with contact adhesive, as you need to wait for it to be a little bit tacky before you can glue the two pieces together. When you glue them together, make sure that you line up the seams perfectly. The way you can check if you're gluing it together correctly is by seeing if you're lining up the dots correctly. Once all of the pieces are stuck together, use your heat gun to shape your mask. The heat from the heat gun will allow the foam to become a little bit malleable, and you'll be able to shape it. Hold it in the shape that you want it to have, and as it cools down, it will retain that shape. The heat gun will also help seal the surface of the foam, which will make priming a lot easier, giving you a smoother finish when you're done with priming. I didn't want my mask to be perfectly smooth since it's from a horror game, so I added a little bit more texture onto the surface of the foam. As you can see here, it's kind of got a leathery, kind of rough texture on certain spots. This adds a really nice organic look to it. The way I created this texture was very simple. I first heated up the surface of the foam, then I took a ball of tin foil and pressed it into the foam. This creates the indentations and makes this really beautiful texture to work with. Now I move on to priming. The reason why we prime the foam is to prepare the foam surface for the next step, which will be painting. The primer I'll be using is going to be a mixture of glue, water, and a bit of acrylic paint. The ratio for these three things will be around about 30% water, 65% glue, and 5% acrylic paint. Now, the reason why I use this glue is that firstly of all, it is easy to get, and it is very easy to use. The glue will create a nice smooth surface, a hard shell on the foam, which prevents the foam from absorbing all of the paint layer. And we mix it with a little bit of water because wood glue by itself is way too thick to spread. It is going to leave a horrible amount of brush strokes when you paint it on. Then the acrylic paint is to add a bit more flexibility into the primer. Wood glue by itself is going to crack when it's dried. So if you finish with your mask and then you end up accidentally bending it, it's going to crack and the surface is going to look horrible. The acrylic paint will add a bit more flexibility to that, so it's much less likely to crack. Finally, the reason why I mix everything into this bottle is because we're going to need several layers of primer. Around about 6 layers is good. And instead of mixing 6 really small batches and wasting a lot of glue and product, so instead I mix one big batch in a bottle and I'm able to use it over a much longer period of time. Now that my primer is finally mixed up, I'll be applying the first layer of primer. As you can see, I'll be spreading it with a paintbrush, and this is what the consistency should be like more or less. Not too thick, but also not too thin to run. If you want a very smooth and clean finished product, you should work in very small layers, as this creates very little texture in the primer. But since I do want some texture in my finished product, that is why I'm working in slightly thicker layers in certain areas. The technique where I am dabbing on the primer is also to create more texture, as it is creating an uneven layer of the primer. Once the first layer of priming is done, you should leave your mask out to dry completely before applying the next layer. You would need around about 4 to 6 layers of primer in total. Don't forget to wash your paintbrush thoroughly with some clean water after every layer of primer, and also to clean the nozzle and the cap of your bottle. Otherwise, when you close it, the glue is going to stick it together and you won't be able to use it again. Take care of your stuff. Once all 6 layers of my primer was done, I added a little bit more extra detailing using some gesso. I layered some thick layers of gesso along the cracks and the seams, and I also used a bit of gesso to fill in the gaps. This texture makes it really organic and adds a bit more of a horror element, I think. Then I finished it off once more with some Rust-Oleum 2x primer. This is an optional step, it just makes that finish a lot nicer.
Once I was finished with my Rust-Oleum spray, I did my base coat. To do this base coat, I mixed out a off-white color with acrylic paint. The mixture is yellow, red, and a tiny bit of blue with a lot of white. And as you can see, I don't really apply this with much care. It's uneven, it's patchy. This is because that's the kind of effect I want. The discolored, uneven sort of look. Once my beige base coat was dried, I added a layer of pure white acrylic on top of it. The uneven layers and the missing spots in certain areas made the paint look old and washed out. If you don't want this splotchy paint and the rough texture, you can be a bit more careful with your primer and your paints. Moving on to the first bit of detailing work, mix out a greenish brown and use that color to dab in and around the crack of the mask. With the same green, mark out where you want the little studs to be. Mark out where your lines are going to be. Once you're happy with how everything looks, darken all your markings and all the detailings with a darker brown. Using hot glue or super glue, glue on the little studs. I will show you how I did the colourful paint splashes in a moment. The lines from earlier was to help us plan out where the wire will go. Those little studs are quite easy to make. I made mine out of polymer clay. They are just two little rounded rectangles stuck together. You can make yours out of EVA foam or air dry clay if you don't have polymer clay. Then you can just prime and paint them. Then to make the wire, we just need some acrylic paint, some string or some twine, and it's quite easy. Paintbrush and apply a generous amount of acrylic paint onto the string, making sure that you cover every single side of it. I had pre-cut my string because I had already estimated more or less how much of the wiring I would need for the mask. Another note is that when I stuck on the wire, I only placed glue around the studs. Onto my personal favourite part of doing this mask, it was adding all the blood. To do the first bit of blood, I mixed a watery mixture of red and a little bit of black with a tiny bit of blue. This will be the dried blood, and this method here is very similar to how I did the colourful splotches. Add a tiny amount of the watery paint onto the mask, then use your finger to dab it and spread it. When doing any kind of weathering, whether it is making something look aged or adding blood, work in small amounts and work in layers. This gives the item a bit more dimension and also makes it look a bit more natural. Working in small amounts also gives you a bit more control, and then you're able to manipulate how you want something to look. Because you can always make something darker if you've made it too light, however, if you made something too dark, it is very difficult to make it lighter again. When adding the fake blood, make sure that you try to make it a bit more random, not too uniform so it looks natural. Then to do the fresh blood effect, I used acrylic glaze medium and some red alcohol ink. The reason why I use these two things is that both are translucent. The acrylic glaze medium that I used is the glossy kind, so when it dries it still has a shiny look, which provides the wet look of the fresh blood that I wanted. To actually do the effect, I waited for the mixture to dry slightly. This way when I added a large blob, instead of running down really quickly, it dripped down slowly while drying, giving us that running droplet effect when it's fully dried. I also used the back of the paintbrush to simply dab around and flick about the brush to give it that splattered look as well. If it gets too dry, you can simply add a little drop of alcohol ink again. The mixture might dry out quite quickly since the alcohol evaporates very fast. You can also see me occasionally tapping the bottom of the mask to allow the droplet to drip a bit faster. But however, you don't want it to drop too quickly, otherwise it's not going to be able to dry while it drips down. As final detailing, I used silver acrylic paint and put 4 dots on it. This is because on some of the artwork, it looks like those little studs are actually the things you have on braces, but obviously this is too big to be realistically braces, and I still thought it looked kinda cool and added the details anyways. Here's what the completed mask looks like with all the details. As you can see, even though the blood is completely dry, it still retains that wet glossy look. To finish off our mask, we'll need some elastic, 2 small pieces of thin EVA foam, and a piece of see-through fabric. Take your mask and take the fabric and estimate how much of it you will need. I added this so that we can have a blacked out look from the outside, but still kind of see-through, even though you can't really see through this mask and your vision kinda sucks, but hey, having 1% vision is better than having none at all. Then using a hot glue gun, I placed glue around the edges of the gaps. Be really careful when you're using hot glue as it can burn you really badly. I placed the fabric over the glue, then used the back of my scissors to tap down the fabric and adhere it to the mask. This is to prevent myself from burning my fingers. Then I trimmed off any excess fabric and repeated it for the other side. It looks like a solid black from the outside, but if you were to wear this mask, you can still see through the gaps. To measure out where you want to put the elastic, just simply mark out where your temple will be if you were to put on the mask. The length of your elastic should be from temple to temple, going from the back of your head and a little bit less. Using hot glue, I placed a generous amount of it onto one end and placed the elastic on. Once that was dried and secured, I stuck on the other side, making sure that when I stuck it on, the elastic was not twisted. Once that was done, I placed a bit of contact adhesive over the elastic and onto the small piece of EVA foam. When both pieces were tacky, I stuck the pieces together. This makes sure that the elastic is on the mask really strongly and it wouldn't come off if you were to pull on it. The reason why I use 2 elastics instead of 1 is because if you wear it like this, it wouldn't move around a lot. And say hi to my cat. Next up is the ruler. This prop is also con-safe since it is made out of EVA foam and some warbler. The construction for it is fairly easy since the pattern is only just a few rectangles. Start off with your rectangle strip of your desired length. Using your craft knife at a 45-degree angle, trim away the 2 sides. Now glue 2 similar rectangles onto the angled edge. The sides facing down are also trimmed away at a 45-degree angle. This is so when you glue the bottom on, it will lay flat. For the shape of the bottom piece, I just took the whole thing and traced it out onto a piece of EVA foam. Same thing for the side, then cut a jagged edge into the sharp end. Primed with 6 layers of the primer like I did with the mask. For the paint, I mixed out a natural looking brown and similar looking shades. When painting, make sure that your brush strokes are up and down the ruler only. Apply each layer unevenly, using each of the different shades of brown, and this will create the natural looking wood grain. Once I had a decent coverage, I then took a hard bristled brush and started using that. This creates a more defined wood grain look. Once the first coat of the paint was done, I mixed in some white into the browns, which I then used to paint in the splintered parts of the broken ruler. This made it seem a little bit more realistic as the broken parts wouldn't have any wood stain in it. Then I also dry brushed on some of that lighter colour onto the rest of the ruler with my hard bristle brush. Making sure to not press the brush too hard and leaving light strokes and lines behind. Once this was dry, I used my hard brush again to fill in any places where there wasn't enough paint. Also, this was the pen that I used to draw on the lines and write the numbers. For the nails, I used Warbler scraps. I heated it up and rolled them into noodles. If you don't have any Warbler on hand, you can also do this out of clay. You can also use kebab sticks if you sand away the sharp tip. Whatever you use, just make sure that it isn't sharp enough to hurt anyone. Here is what the completed nails look like. All of them are slightly different. Some are longer, some are shorter, some are thinner, and some are bent. Then I just painted them with some acrylic paint, and then moved on to gluing them onto the ruler. Don't glue them on too quickly, as you want to fiddle around with the positioning and try see what looks nice. And once you have a plan, you can start gluing each nail on with some hot glue. Once the glue has cooled down, you can start fiddling around with the tape. Try wrap it in a way that it goes around each of the nails. I use masking tape, but the other option is duct tape. Once I was happy with the positioning of my tape, I used my fingers to scrunch up and crinkle some areas. Then I used the same mixture as before to do the fake blood, focusing on the nails and by where the ruler is broken. And here is what the blood looks like when it's dried.
Thank you guys so much for watching till the end, and if you would like to learn how to make the rest of the cosplay, the hoodie and the skirt, there will be a link in the description down below where it will take you to my YouTube channel, and there I will have a video on how to make these two items as well. And yeah, if you guys do make the mask and the ruler, please tag me in it. I would love to see the creations you guys make. And yeah, if you guys have any questions on EVO foam or how to make the mask or any other queries, you guys can pop me a DM on Instagram. If you guys think I'm neat and you guys like me, please give me a follow. I would really like that as well. And my Instagram tag is Jessie Jestar. That is JESSIE_JESTAR. And of course, please give Comic Con Africa a like and a follow. And until next time, thank you so much for tuning in again.